In today's world, there are many conflicts in foreign policy. They range from inter-alliance conflicts all the way to terrorism. Many different schools of thought attempt to explain these conflicts, the two major schools of thought being realist and liberal perspectives. Realist perspectives on today's world. Realist perspectives anticipate the historical cycle of empires and equilibrium, but they disagree on what configuration of power is best for stability and peace. Some believe that the United States can preserve its dominance and advocate preventative measures to delay the loss of their dominance. Other realists follow a power balancing school and anticipate decline in power and rely on deterrence and containment to fight off rising powers such as China, Russia, and the European Union and Japan. Defensive realists identify with power transition theory. Defensive realists identify with power balancing theory. But few realists believe that liberal perspectives, such as international institutions, courts, and economic development, can replace the balance of power, which includes things like the need for unilateral action.
Mac, keep your head down. Got it.
Flexible alliances and the use of military force to stabilize world politics and support economic interdependence. Realist perspectives believe that the future that was most prominent after the war was American unipolarity. The US did not suffer significant losses and thus rose to dominant global political power without challenge after the Cold War. Three separate views emerged in the realist school of thought that sought to explain the nature of American dominance. Power transition realists believe that American dominance is best for the security of the country and the hegemony can be preserved. They see war rising from the movement away from hegemony and towards equilibrium. The power transition school of thought seeks to justify hegemony as moral and fostering peace. Power transition realists believe that taking action before the threat is visible is the best strategy. Power balancing realists predicted American dominance would not last. Historically, they observed at some point all hegemonies have always been brought back down to equilibrium. Power balancing realists saw wars arising from the movement away from equilibrium. Minimal realists believe that the US should spare no effort to defend itself, and there is no need to enter into alliances with other countries unless the threat requires them to. If America is attacked, however, minimal realists are quick to strike and destroy the enemy. As the Soviet Union was falling apart, the power transition realists wanted to implement aggressive policies to break up the Soviet Union, while power balancing realists preferred to negotiate instead of break up the Soviet Union.
This is a new and different world. Not since 1945 have we seen the real possibility of using the United Nations as it was designed, as a center for international collective security. Quote by President H.W. Bush. Collective security is the establishment of common institutions and rules among states to settle disputes peacefully and to enforce agreements by a preponderance, not a balance of power. The collective security implies the security of multiple states through institutions such as the UN to settle disputes. An example of collective security being successful is the First Persian Gulf War, where the UN, led by the US, successfully forced Iraq out of Kuwait after the UN authorized military action. This was seen by the liberal perspective as the coming of age for international law. A byproduct of this, however, was the rise of Islamic terrorism such as Al-Qaeda. While an example of a failed attempt at collective security could be Somalia in 1992, where the US withdrew their troops after suffering casualties. They were withdrawn by Clinton due to domestic pressure. Then an example of no action being taken is in Rwanda in 1994. Houthis killed more than 500,000 Tutsis in a case of genocide. The UN did not act during this genocide. China and Iran. Interdependence creates both mutual benefits and, if interrupted, political costs. Liberal perspectives rely heavily on these benefits and costs of interdependence to help manage international conflicts. Liberals rely on economic bonds being stronger in the end than military or ideological ambitions. This can be illustrated by China and Iran. China illustrates the promise that the benefits of trade will encourage good behavior, and Iran, the perils that could cost sanctions will discourage bad behavior. Liberals rely on economic bonds being stronger in the end than military or ideological ambitions.
International institutions are one of the most useful tools for performing collective security and establishing communication between nations. There are both intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, also known as IGOs and NGOs. IGOs are formally created by governments, while NGOs are non-state actors. An example of an IGO is the United Nations and Doctors Without Borders for NGOs. International organizations also develop international laws. According to the liberal perspective, these laws help unite the modern world. One of the best known international treaties is the Geneva Conventions of 1949. The conventions were written after World War II as a universal code of conduct that countries should abide by to protect human life. International trade and economic dependence is another key part of the liberal perspective. Some international economic institutions today include the International Monetary Fund and World Trade Organization. These organizations help manage exchange rates, trade negotiations, and economic development between nations.
To conclude, realist perspectives on today's world rely on the historical cycle of power and generally unified by the idea that world politics ultimately is always in the field of conflict among states pursuing power. Liberalism, in stark contrast to this idea, believes in the measurement of power through state economies, the possibility of peace and cooperation, as well as the concepts of political freedoms, rights, and the like. What all this means is that there are many different takes on how foreign policy should be constructed around the world, and how world leaders try to fit themselves into this world of politics. But nevertheless, we can use our understanding of these schools of thought to help us individually understand the world leaders and what they are thinking when they go through a decision-making process, and hopefully be more enlightened because of it.